Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We've got a lot of ground to cover for June 5th, 2026. From shifting geopolitics to some massive economic ripple effects, we're going to break down exactly what is moving the needle today. So, here's how we're breaking things down to make sense of all this interconnected news. First, we'll dive into conflicts and global diplomacy. Then we'll look at the economic and environmental impact of those tensions. And finally, we'll wrap up with the World Cup and culture. Let's get right into it.
Okay, segment 1, conflicts and global diplomacy.
Right off the bat, we're seeing a really stark disconnect between what diplomats are saying and what is actually happening on the ground. Despite claims of a US-backed ceasefire, heavy fighting is definitely continuing. In fact, Israel just conducted its deepest incursion into Lebanon in 26 years. And tragically, this escalation has already claimed the life of a United Nations peacekeeper. Sergeant Milovan Jovanovic was killed by mortar fire in southern Lebanon.
Shifting over to US-Iran relations, President Donald Trump just made an interesting statement. He said he'd actually be, quote, honored to meet with Iran's new supreme leader, Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei. But, and this is absolutely crucial to note, that willingness is highly conditional. It relies entirely on whether a diplomatic deal is actually reached first.
Now, this next part is, well, it's a wild juxtaposition. The US and Russia have this incredibly complex dynamic going right now. On one hand, you have the US House passing legislation for $1.8 billion in additional Ukraine aid, while actively tightening sanctions on Russia's oil and gas sector. But reportedly, on the exact same day, Washington and Moscow are actually set to sign an agreement to design a massive tunnel across the Bering Strait together. Literally, heavy sanctions operating right alongside a joint infrastructure mega project.
Meanwhile, diplomatic positioning is just shifting rapidly all over the board right now. You've got Ukraine's President Zelensky publicly calling for direct, face-to-face negotiations with Vladimir Putin. At the same time, Putin is out there actively courting other major global players. He's been praising India's economic growth and their independent foreign policy, clearly aiming to expand economic ties with New Delhi and push back against Western pressure.
Just to round out the international politics section, the United States has officially imposed new sanctions on Cuban leader Miguel Diaz-Canel. And what's crucial here is that these aren't just aimed at him. They actually extend directly to his family members as well, basically trying to tighten the economic noose on the regime's inner circle.
Moving on to segment 2, economic and environmental impact.
Take a look at this number, 2.4%. That's the new 2026 Global Economic Growth Forecast from Fitch Ratings. They just officially downgraded it. And when a major credit rating agency drops a downgrade like that, we really need to look at the why.
While the anatomy of this slowdown is basically a massive domino effect, here's how it plays out. The ongoing US-Iran escalation directly triggered a global oil crisis. That oil crisis, that's the specific catalyst driving this 2.4% downgrade. But the ripple effects don't stop there. This is hitting global supply chains incredibly hard, which leads to a huge blow to food security. In fact, UN agencies are warning right now about rising hunger in Africa and Afghanistan strictly because of these overlapping disruptions.
Over on the environmental front, we have some major news. Just ahead of World Environment Day, the UN General Assembly adopted a massive climate resolution. This is a big deal because it explicitly defines the climate change obligations of states, it aims to actively protect environmental activists on the ground, and it basically builds a real framework to hold nations accountable for actual environmental harm. Now, for a highly concerning and honestly pretty bizarre ecological update for our North American viewers, U.S. officials are aggressively monitoring the first case of the flesh-eating New World screwworm fly in 60 years. Yeah, 60 years. It was just detected on a calf in Texas. It's a really vivid reminder of just how fast biological and ecological threats can reemerge.
Okay, that brings us to our third and final segment, World Cup and culture.
So the 2026 World Cup kickoff is literally next week, guys. But man, it is facing an absolute cascade of logistical hurdles. First off, you have Iranian footballers stuck dealing with visa delays at the US Embassy. Then you've got the broader Middle East conflict, which is noticeably driving down international fan attendance. Add to that FIFA having to cancel dozens of tickets because of fraud irregularities, and local governments, like Ontario, aggressively hiking up fines to crack down on illegal ticket resales. The whole infrastructure is just under immense strain right now.
Finally today, we want to take a moment to respectfully note the passing of two deeply influential British cultural icons. Both of these men shaped modern entertainment in their own entirely unique ways.
First up is John Blanche. Now, if you're at all familiar with the Warhammer tabletop gaming universe, you absolutely know his work. He was the iconic British illustrator and artist, and his work quite literally laid the foundation for that gritty, grimdark aesthetic that millions of fans across the globe just love. His visual legacy is essentially the bedrock of that entire franchise.
We're also saying goodbye to beloved British actor Anthony Head, who has passed away at the age of 72. He had such a long, celebrated career across the stage and screen, but for so many of us around the world, he will always be cherished for his unforgettable role as Rupert Giles in Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
And that wraps up today's Explainer. But before we go, I want to leave you with this final thought to really chew on. How are these converging global crises, from interconnected wars and economic slowdowns to sudden ecological threats, how are they going to reshape the remainder of 2026? As we saw today, an incursion in the Middle East can literally trigger a credit rating downgrade in New York, which then hits food supplies in Afghanistan, all while the globe is just trying to get together for the World Cup. It's like a giant puzzle, and it is all connected. Thanks so much for joining us for this Explainer. Keep learning, stay curious, and we'll catch you next time.